A nation can survive its fools, and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within.
They've been wrong about the wars, they've been wrong about jobs, they've been wrong about everything. The question is, are they stupid or do they have a plan? I actually think for the most part, they have a plan, but some are not too smart.
Welcome to the Horrible, Deplorable Show, the anti-globalist, America First program dedicated to dehoaxing the media and destroying the narrative. Here's your host, the founder and editor of the Daily Stir, Matt Wingard.
Welcome to the Horrible, Deplorable Show. My name is Matt Wingard, and with me, as always, is my good friend Doris. Hello, Doris.
Hello, Matt.
I want to welcome the Gab community and remind you that you can listen to this podcast, episode number 34, on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Pocket Cast. We're even on YouTube. Just search for The Horrible Deplorable Show. We play weekdays at 11 a.m. on the405media.com and 5 p.m. on the weekends, the405media.com. And you can always find these podcast episodes on our news site, thedailystir.com. So the big discussion this week is about whether or not the government's going to shut down. And all of this, of course, is over the fact that you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass a budget bill. And so this is the leverage point that the Democrats have. And they want a DACA deal. And we've certainly had some concerns about whether or not the president was going to make a bad deal. It now looks at this point as if he's unwilling to make any kind of a horrible DACA deal. And he took some flack in the last week for this, we'll just say it, shithole comment. He said, why are we bringing in immigrants from all these shithole countries? Now that's what he is attributed to have said. So let's talk about this for a moment. So what had actually happened that day was that Dickie Durbin, as the president has nicknamed him, the Democrat from Illinois, and Lindsey Graham, the Republican, so-called, from South Carolina, who both basically want to give away the store on DACA, had come to an agreement, and I think that they believed that they could walk into the White House, have a meeting with the president, who tends to be kind of agreeable in these meetings, and that they would get some kind of handshake deal that they thought they would hold him to. But as they complained bitterly later, Stephen Miller, and it looks like John Kelly has admitted as much as well that he was in on this, they knew they were coming, and they invited Cotton and Representative Goodlatte and others to come and be in the meeting as well, just to make sure the president was hearing from all sides. And so it was clear when they walked in the room that they were not going to get some really crazy DACA deal from just meeting privately with the president. And they were upset about that. So Dickie Durbin ends up going out and claiming that in the private meeting, the president he'd been approached by, I'm sure, a Democrat about whether or not they could continue some exemptions for people from Haiti, refugees from Haiti, and some African countries. And he had, according to Dickie Durbin, remarked, why are we bringing in all of these immigrants from shithole countries? Now, there's a couple things to say about this. One is it's a private meeting, and it's not like the president is saying whatever it is that he's accused of saying in a public meeting. So it's not an official public statement. It's not a tweet. It's anything like that. It's somebody breaking the confidence of having a private meeting with the president. So the idea that every single one of the previous presidents, going back at least 100 years, hasn't been a foul-mouthed cusser behind the scenes is just ridiculous. And if you want, go online and look up the audio tapes of the Lyndon Johnson White House and just listen to those for about 20 minutes, and you'll understand that Donald Trump is practically a nun compared to the mouth on Lyndon Johnson. A Democrat, by the way. Anyway, I believe that what happened was they were very bitter about the idea that this meeting had not gone the way they had wanted to. And so Dickie Durbin thought that he could essentially do a couple things. He could hurt the president with that leak, and also I think he thought he could reframe the debate, put the president on the defensive, get him accused of being a racist, so that he would then be more inclined to want to make a DACA deal to try to compensate for that. So it was entirely a political move, and it must be seen in that context. Now, on top of that, it turns out there's about 4 people, including Senator Cotton, who were in that meeting, who all claim that the president did not say that. Or at least that they did not hear him say that. And Dickie Durbin has actually a reputation for claiming things were said in meetings that turn out not to be true. So he has actually no credibility in making a claim like this, although Lindsey Graham also claims he heard that, and so you have the two of them. From my standpoint, I actually think the comment did not hurt the president. It helped him. The vast majority of Americans agreed with the sentiment that he was sharing. And it actually, I saw someone on social media make the comment that they can't remember a more profound question being asked by a president in recent decades. Why are we bringing all of these people in from these crap hole countries? And he's right. Whoever posted that is exactly right. It is a profound question. And I think a lot of Americans essentially agree with him. And if they don't agree with him, then they really weren't that bothered by him saying it. It's a classic example of 180-degree politics. A lot of people are claiming to be offended by it who are not actually offended by it. They're just pretending to be offended by it because it's good politics to pretend to be offended by it. But as I said, it may turn out, although we'll never really know, that this could get added to the list of things that President Trump has claimed to have said or done that he actually never said or done, including making fun of a disabled reporter, which never happened. So it appears that the president knows how to drive a good deal. And it's also clear from what we've seen over the last couple of weeks that the Democrats, as I predicted, don't actually want to make a deal on DACA. They just want the issue. All signs from them are that they want something close to a clean DACA deal, and they're really not willing to negotiate away any kind of a significant reform to the immigration system in order to get it. So without that, then there really can be no deal. And I think they know that, and they have decided that this is good politics for them. And we may be today or tomorrow headed for, although I think the Republicans are probably going to pass a continuing resolution. But the point is we're going to have an ongoing fight here about a government shutdown. I actually think this is great politics for Republicans. I don't think they have the courage to see it through. They also can't be united because you've got saboteurs like Lindsey Graham involved in the whole process on our side. But a shutdown in which the military is not being funded and, the national parks have to close and everything else because the Democrats want citizenship for illegals is a great political fight for Republicans to have. And as I've been saying on this podcast now for a number of weeks, Republicans need one or two fights here in 2018 in order to remind voters about why it's important to elect them and defeat Democrats in the November election. So this is a fight I actually think that they should have. I've seen a lot of crap on social media about how Republicans get blamed for shutdowns and it's not good for them. But let's go over the truth of what has happened. It's a myth that shutdowns are bad for Republicans. The two most prominent shutdowns happened in 1995 under Gingrich and in 2013 when Boehner was in control of the House, but Democrats had the Senate and Obama was in the White House. As a result of the 1995 government shutdown, the president eventually compromised, budgets were cut, and Republicans in Congress produced a surplus for nearly 6 years in the federal budget. They did not, in the election that followed, lose control of the House or the Senate. They lost some seats. They would not lose control until 2006, nearly 10 years later. And what actually happened at the end of the Clinton administration is that a Republican was elected. Okay, in 2013, the government was shut down again for a period of a couple of weeks. Everybody piled on to Ted Cruz about that, claimed it was the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen. It was a year before the 2014 elections. A lot of hair was being pulled out, that this was going to cost Republicans dearly. What happened? What happened was the Republicans were swept into the Senate, in control of the Senate. They gained seats in the House, and they were able to fully block Obama's agenda from that day forward, culminating in 2016 with the election again of a Republican. So it is a myth that government shutdowns hurt the Republican Party. Now, they are painful while they're happening because, of course, as we know, and I will call them the 90% media because, as we've seen under the Trump administration, 90% to 95% of the coverage that Trump gets is negative. So let's call them the 90% media, which means that in any particular event that's going on between Democrats and Republicans, you can expect that 90% of the coverage is going to be in favor of the Democrats and against the Republicans. So while a shutdown is going on, the entire media apparatus comes into effect to try to tell horror stories and to frame everything as it's the Republicans' fault and to downplay the fact, in this case, if there is a shutdown, it'll be because there were no Democrats willing to participate in getting to the 60 votes in the Senate, and they'll pile on. But that is not when the election occurs. The election is 10 months away. And after the shutdowns are over, if you hold tight and you gain something, which the Republicans have done, you will ultimately see a benefit to Republicans in this. The public ultimately sides with Republicans. Or, if you want to put it a different way, they don't end up actually punishing them for those shutdowns. So this is a big myth. It's a Washington, D.C. myth. It's perpetrated by the media and never Trump Republicans and all the people who are either paid losers or liberals who want you to believe that so that they don't have to go through these fights. But the actual evidence is that these turn out to be very good for Republicans when we do them. Inviting a government shutdown in which Democrats have let basically American citizens stop receiving services because they have prioritized illegals as their number one priority. This is an excellent fight. This is better than the last two shutdowns. You can't ask for a better matchup than this.
It sounds really good to me. And the Democrats think that they are winning and all the time they're losing.
Republicans need to energize their base, and fights like this energize your base. I have said now, again, for the last month or two, that Republicans are going to need a fight or two because tax cuts are not enough to energize the base when it comes to those November elections. I think you should pick these fights in the summer. It's a little closer to the election, but still, a fight like this helps to remind a lot of people in the middle who are not necessarily very political. It reminds them of who the Democrats are fighting for. And it's a good fight to have.
So you think that the public will understand that the Democrats are protecting DACA and letting the budget go?
Yes, because even with the 90% media, the way the internet is structured now, and we've proven this in the 2016 election, is our messages do get out through Twitter, through Facebook, out on the internet. We get our arguments out there. We can circumvent the large media. And whenever we have these fights, look at all the fights we've had over something Trump has said or done. They attempt in the first 48 or 72 hours to absolutely inundate the public with their version of what happened. But the truth pounds back. And ultimately, when you go out and ask people 4 weeks later, they heard our side, and most of the time they agreed with us. We win these fights over the long run when we tough them out. And so, yes, I absolutely believe that the media, of course, as I said, is going to try to frame it as all Republicans' fault, but people are going to understand that this is a fight over DACA. They're going to understand who's on the side of the DACA recipients, and they're going to figure out where the priorities. I mean, look, it's already being framed right now very well. I've seen statements from McConnell today saying, I can't believe the Democrats would shut down the military over this issue, which is just smart. It's just smart. That's a beautiful way to frame this. Pit veterans and soldiers against DACA recipients. That's a political winner every day. Now, I've seen a little bit of talk about someone had floated the idea of giving DACA recipients a 6-month extension in exchange for passing the budget. Now, in my mind, that is an excellent trade. Why? Go back to the things that I've talked about before. A good trade, because what I've talked about in the past is how Republicans have made very bad deals in the past. As I have complained, we often trade away a short-term victory for ourselves for a long-term victory for the Democrats, and those are deals I always reject and I'm against. Show me the opposite, and I'll sign up. The Democrats want a 6-month extension for DACA. That means that we're right back with the expiration and them being deported in 6 months. In exchange, we get the budget passed. I would take that deal. That allows us to avoid the government shutdown, to get key elements in the budget. I wouldn't do a 6-month extension for a continuing resolution, but if you actually were able to pass budgets and all you had to do was delay the deportation of DACA recipients by 6 months, that's a winner, folks. I saw that today what's going on is the House is voting on a continuing resolution, and the Senate is voting to pass the FISA bill. Now, the FISA bill started in the House. There was an amendment offered by Justin Amash from Michigan who wanted to curtail the government's powers around FISA, something that I actually believe in. I think that FISA has had its day. I supported this in the beginning. I remember saying at the time when it was created in the wake of 9/11 that this will ultimately be abused. It's a useful tool in the first flush after the 9/11 when we had no idea how penetrated we were inside the country by terrorists and terrorist cells. Obviously, when a bunch of planes are being flown into buildings, you have to reassess the fact that your intelligence community has absolutely no idea what's going on. So I had a kind of a Machiavellian view of FISA. There were a lot of civil libertarians at the time who said it would be abused, and I've been around long enough to know that any kind of power like that ultimately will be abused. My opinion at the time was, I think the program is necessary in the short term. It had a sunset on it, and I knew the time would come when I would oppose it. Now, of course, killing programs like this is very difficult, and it may very well turn out that it it's impossible, and I'll take my lumps for that as a result. But I certainly am on the side of the people who want to curtail the program now, and because we actually have solid evidence that the FISA warrants have been abused. I think it's going to be revealed in 2018 in pretty stark terms that the Obama Justice Department and intelligence community was using the FISA process to spy on the Republican candidate running for president of the United States, in this case Donald Trump. That's a high treason. I mean, when they talk about high crimes and misdemeanors, that's as high a crime as you can get, using the intelligence community, the most powerful agencies in the government, to try to thwart the presidential election in your country. That's it. It just doesn't get any more treasonous than that. And I think that the powers need to be curtailed. All of which is to say, Justin Amash, who I'm actually not a fan of and is kind of a never-Trumper, brought an amendment to curtail the FISA warrant process, and that was defeated in the House. The whole bill is now over in the Senate, and it looks like it was sailing to passage today in the Senate when we started this program. And I expect that the president is going to sign it. I'm not happy about that, and we're going to have to continue to pound away on this. We don't have the votes. We have a lot of these Republicans who are still kind of wedded to the military-industrial complex and to some degree the deep state and the Chamber of Commerce and others, and they just aren't ready to vote to roll back these powers. And they're going to constantly tell you that the government has to have these powers to protect us. Understand that argument goes all the way to what the UK has. The UK has CCTV cameras throughout the entire country. They can literally track you from one end of the country, walking or driving. Okay? Well, I mean, if your argument is we have to keep you safe, then why not have wall-to-wall cameras in the United States so you can track the movement of every American everywhere they go? Let's put up 1,000 satellites over the country so that we can GPS locate and track every single human being. Let's put cameras and monitors inside everybody's homes. After all, if the only objective is to keep people safe from terrorism, that might very well work, except that we believe in some other things in this country, including personal autonomy and freedom and independence and things like that. And anybody with half a brain molecule knows that comes with trade-offs then. You cannot be as safe as you would like to be if you want to live in a free country. If there's going to be freedom of movement, if there's going to be some level of human autonomy, some people are going to abuse that and kill others. And we don't want to live in a surveillance state. So once you understand that there are trade-offs involved, then the fact that the people who vote for the FISA warrants are going to basically list all of the terrorist events that have occurred and say, you have to have this, we have to have this in order to keep the country safe, that's just a phony argument. We as Americans know that we're going to have some level of intelligence, but we get to decide where the line is when it comes to trading off our own personal independence and freedom against these kinds of intrusive and kind of Orwellian. Look, with the current system, they're collecting everyone's texts, they're collecting everyone's emails, they're collecting everyone's phone calls, claiming they're not listening, but do you believe them? I also thought it was interesting that there were enough Republicans that peeled off on this amendment vote in the House that Democrats needed to supply the votes to get it passed. And it was basically the leadership of the Democrat side that joined with Republicans to defeat the amendment and to pass the bill. People like Nancy Pelosi and others. Now, these are the very same people that go out there daily and talk about what a danger Trump is and that he's basically the next Stalin. And yet they worked with Republicans to give him immense surveillance powers, right? They don't believe the rhetoric that they spew out of their mouths about how he's a danger to the Republic. If they actually believed that, if you really thought Republicans had elected Stalin, you would not give him vast surveillance powers. No way, Jose, would you do that. So, proving once again, if you didn't already know about my genius, when I describe for you the 180-degree tactics that Democrats will simply say whatever is necessary, whatever is poll-tested, and then abandon that the next day, I guarantee you that these Democrats who voted to give the president these vast powers within the previous 24 hours had been at some fundraiser or some event talking about how dangerous the president of the United States is. They're phonies.
It's like there's a competition between FISA and Google and Facebook to see who can intrude on your lives the most.
They all have incentives to do it, whether it's a financial motive or just a power motive. And it is a growing discussion in this country. I think it's rising on the list of concerns for Americans. And ultimately, I think probably within the next decade, we are going to have to move legislation or do something to push back on the growing surveillance state. It's interesting that in the UK, it was essentially a vast state-run and state-implemented surveillance state before the tech overlords kind of moved in. A lot of what Facebook and Twitter and others do in the UK is kind of just an add-on to what the state had already done in the UK. In the United States, it really is our tech overlords who've created the vast surveillance state first. Most of what the government does using their surveillance powers is to tap into the social media giants. They require Twitter and Facebook and Google to turn over information. They require the phone companies to turn over the text. So it's actually a lot of independent and private companies, large corporate giants, who are the ones who actually run the surveillance state in the United States of America, and then they very quietly turn that information over to our government. Which, if you think about it, if you're the government, you don't have to pay all the money to implement that system. You don't have to pay all the money to run that system. You just simply kind of plug your little plug into the machine that's already working and draw electricity from it. So, and if we've talked about before, these social media companies and the phone companies, we all pay for those services. Whether it's, in the social media, we give over our personal information, which they then monetize in order to produce a profit, or the phone companies who actually charge us monthly for the use of the phone, we fund our own surveillance state. Now, obviously, in the UK and other places, they do as well through their taxes. But we voluntarily, in the private sector, in the United States, fund our own surveillance state. Crazy train. Chelsea Manning is running for Senate in Maryland.
Who against Chelsea Manning?
So Chelsea Manning is the U.S. soldier who was a he when he was serving over, I think in Afghanistan, it might have been Iraq, but I think it was Afghanistan, and was in intelligence, low level, but had access on his computer to a lot of things, including drone footage and the rest. Downloaded a bunch of it, gave it over to WikiLeaks, was ultimately identified and arrested, charged, convicted in a military court, and sentenced to many years in Leavenworth or wherever they throw them without a key at this point. While in prison, transitioned to being a female, and as one of his last acts in office, President Obama commuted the sentence. Did not pardon Chelsea Manning, but commuted the sentence to allow she to get out after, I think, about 7 years, somewhere around 7 years in prison. So she is kind of a hero to the trans community, a hero to the folks who are sort of militantly anti the government, folks like, that are hardcore supporters of WikiLeaks and Glenn Greenwald and others like that. Chelsea Manning is now running for Senate in Maryland against Democrat Ben Cardin. Now, I actually think this is a really good thing. And we want this campaign to be very public. She's already put out their first YouTube video with their ad. It's pretty slick. It's pretty good. Looks like she's going to have some support. I would like Chelsea to be well funded, and I want this to be a vigorous primary campaign because it's great to have Chelsea Manning associated with the Democrats. You don't want this to be, I realize that it's clown world stuff, but that's the whole point. When it's clown world stuff, you want it to be very public. You don't want the Democrats to be able to kind of shove this to the side and to minimize it and have Ben Cardin sort of skate to a very easy primary, because then it doesn't get a lot of press attention and most people don't know about it. We want Chelsea Manning to get a lot of press attention, to get a lot of money, and I wouldn't be opposed to people donating to the campaign to make sure that she can put out a lot of television ads, can be visually seen, can make a good hard run against Ben Cardin, because that's very helpful in 2018 if the Democrat Party is associated with DACA and Chelsea Manning, who is both mentally unstable and obviously troubled, but also a traitor. These are things we would like to have the Democrats associated with. So, yes, it's clown world, but when your opponents give you a gift like this, elevate, folks. Elevate and accentuate. Put the spotlight on it. It's good. Good, good. I saw in the last week or so the president actually make a suggestion that maybe earmarks should come back. I know why he's doing that, because with earmarks back and being able to give individual members specific things for their districts, you can actually wheel and deal and essentially buy votes to get things passed. It's a way of essentially, I think he's suggesting, buying off some Democrats, probably some key Democrats in the Senate, in order to be able to get some of those 60-vote thresholds. And in theory, I actually think, again, selling off the short term for the long term, if you can get important legislation passed, nationalist, make America great legislation passed, and all you have to do is trade away a bridge or a building or some construction project to a Democrat in the Senate for their vote, that's a good trade. That's a short-term victory, some $100 or $200 or $300 million appropriation to a Democrat in order to get their vote for a bill that would say roll back Obamacare or, do something significant. Those are the kinds of deals you want to make. So I understand why he proposed that. And I actually said at the time, look, I think if Republicans could actually cut the budget, people wouldn't really care as much about earmarks. Earmarks are sort of synonymous with the idea that these budgets grow because everybody piles in the projects that they want and they become these big behemoths. But if you can actually pass budgets that are less, not a cut in the increase in the budgets, but an actual reduction in spending, then no one will care, I don't think, very much that it's filled with earmarks for people's specific districts. But people who are fiscally conservative want to see is the budgets decrease. And if it takes earmarks in order to do that, I actually think a lot of people will be willing to make that trade-off. However, I was amused this week when some videos surfaced. They had a hearing in the House about maybe bringing back the earmark process. And good old Don Young from Alaska, who had the most famous earmark in human history, the Bridge to Nowhere, spoke up and actually said that he had personally suffered because people had wanted to use the Bridge to Nowhere money to help Katrina victims. And this video was circulating of him making the argument that because they took away his Bridge to Nowhere money, Katrina victims actually got help. And I actually moved that along in social media on Gab and Twitter and said that probably single-handedly sunk the Bring the Earmarks movement back. I mean, it was such a terrible video for anybody who was actually trying to make the argument to bring I think it died right there, folks. I'm not sure they'll be able to bring earmarks back. But as I said, the Club for Growth is against it and intends to vigorously oppose it. My personal opinion on this is that if they can pair earmarks with actually reducing the budget, I am not opposed to it. But since I don't think they can do that, I obviously would side with the people who would oppose earmarks. It's kind of like the debate we have in Oregon about a sales tax. They always try to offer to reduce the income and property taxes in exchange for creating the sales tax. And I always tell people, don't fall for that. If they won't actually eliminate one of the other taxes, don't fall for the reduction, because if it's not gone, it will come back. Even if they take your income tax and cut it in half, if you've now given them a sales tax, the sales tax will never go away and it will only increase. And even though they cut the income tax, they will begin slowly but surely increasing it. And you'll find in about 10 or 15 years that you're right back where you were with the income tax, but now you have a sales tax. And you got tricked by trading away the short term for a long-term gain that the communists got over you. My argument has always been that I'm not opposed to a sales tax, but tell me which of the other two taxes you're going to eliminate entirely, the income or the property tax, and then we can have that debate. And I have argued that people in Oregon might actually seriously consider a sales tax if you were offering to eliminate, not reduce, one of the other two taxes. And that's the same thing here. I'm opposed to a sales tax because I know they will never agree to eliminate it. And the Democrats have been very clear on that. They don't even want a sales tax if they have to eliminate one of the other taxes. They want a sales tax to add to the taxes. And so, of course, I'm opposed to a sales tax for that reason. Not in theory, but in actuality. And it's the same thing here with earmarks. I am not opposed to earmarks in theory, but I am opposed to earmarks in actuality because they will never be paired with an actual reduction in the budget. So David Brooks, who is the token pretend Republican in the New York Times, and who has a regular spot on NPR, which should tell you everything you need to know, wrote this op-ed that got a lot of attention about kind of taking his own side, the Never Trump side, to task. And I had promised that I was going to deal with it in the last podcast, and I'm sorry we were full up with other things, so I'm going to get to it this week. I want to read some pieces from this and tell you why I think he's full of crap. So the title of it is The Decline of Anti-Trumpism. And I'm going to just read a little bit of it and give you a flavor of the kind of BS he was selling in this op-ed. Quote, "Let me start with 3 inconvenient observations based on dozens of conversations around Washington over the last year. First, people who got into the White House and go into the White House to have a meeting with President Trump usually leave pleasantly surprised. They find that Trump is not the raving madman they expected from his tweet storms or the media coverage. They generally say that he is affable, if repetitive. He runs a normal, good meeting and seems well informed enough to get by. Second, people who work in the Trump administration have wildly divergent views about their boss. Some think he is a deranged child, as Michael Wolff reported, but some think he is merely a distraction that they can work around. Some think he is strange, but not impossible. Some genuinely admire Trump. Many filter out his crazy stuff and pretend it doesn't exist. End quote. So, what he's repeating there is just catty DC stuff. I guarantee you that he got very few of those anecdotes from the actual people in the White House. He's talking to people who claim they are talking to people in the White House who are telling him those things. Oh, Trump's a little deranged, or he can be repetitive and all these things. Brooks doesn't actually know that. And he is doing that because he likes to share that gossip. If he was hearing those kinds of things about Obama, and I guarantee you they heard those kinds of things about Obama, he would not pass them along in his op-ed. Quote, my impression is that the Trump administration is an unhappy place to work because there is a lot of infighting and often no direction from the top. But this is not an administration full of people itching to invoke the 25th Amendment. Third, the White House is getting more professional. Imagine if Trump didn't tweet. The craziness of the past weeks would be out of the way and we'd see a White House that is briskly pursuing its goals. The shift in our Pakistan policy, the shift in our offshore drilling policy, the fruition of our ISIS policy, the nomination for judgeships, and the formation of policies on infrastructure, DACA, North Korea, and trade. It's almost as if there are two White Houses. There's the Potemkin White House, which we tend to focus on, Trump berserk in front of the TV, the lawyers working the Russian investigation, and the press operation. Then there is the invisible White House that you never hear about, which is getting more effective at managing around the distracted boss. I sometimes wonder if the invisible White House has learned to use the Potemkin White House to deke us while it changes the country. End quote. So he thinks this is an accident, and he also thinks that he has stumbled onto some strange truth, that Trump is sort of acting crazy and that his staff has sort of figured out that while everyone's distracted with that, they might be able to get some things done. In fact, as we have explained on this podcast, that is all very purposeful. Trump understands that there's this giant media complex that needs to be fed every day and that it's going to feed on him one way or the other. And so if he doesn't essentially distract them and give them things to spin on, then they're going to drill down on the EPA and the Interior Department and Defense, and they're going to come at him on things that really matter. So he feeds them all this tabloid crap, which they cannot help themselves because the innate producer, if you tell him some porn stars claim to have slept with the president and that Pruitt is about to lay off 100 EPA employees, the producer, the TV producer is going to say, okay, we're giving 50 minutes to the porn star and 30 seconds to the EPA story. That's how they think because they know they're going to get more eyeballs for the porn star story. And now that's actually true. They are going to get more eyeballs for the porn star story. So Trump understands that a tweet that is incites them to go crazy will get 10 times more coverage on television, and they will pull away time from more serious stories, and so he knows how to distract them. David Brooks thinks he's stumbled onto some profound truth, and he also thinks that it's a total accident, and he's wrong. He's just absolutely wrong. Quote, I mention these inconvenient observations because the anti-Trump movement, of which I'm a proud member, seems to be getting dumber. It seems to be settling into a smug fairy tale version of reality that filters out discordant information. More anti-Trumpers seem to be telling themselves a Madness of King George narrative. Trump is a semi-literate madman surrounded by sycophants who are morally, intellectually, and psychologically inferior to the people like us. I'd like to think it's possible to be fervently anti-Trump while also not reducing everything to a fairy tale. The anti-Trump movement suffers from insularity. Most of the people who detest Trump don't know anybody who works with him or supports him. Side note, like Brooks. And if they do have friends and family who admire Trump, they've learned not to talk about this subject. So they get most of their information about Trumpism from others who also detest Trumpism, which is always a recipe for epistemic closure. The movement also suffers from lowbrowism. Fox News pioneered modern lowbrowism. The modern lowbrow, think Sean Hannity or Dinesh D'Souza, ignores normal journalistic or intellectual standards. He creates a style of communication that doesn't make you think more, it makes you think and notice less. He offers a steady diet of affirmation, focuses on simple topics that require little background information, and gets viewers addicted to daily doses of righteous contempt and delicious vindication. end quote. So this is David Brooks, who is the conservative from PBS, decrying that another mainstream media outlet has made real progress in fighting the narrative, right? He hates Fox News because Fox News doesn't toe the line. If there wasn't a Fox News, everything would be what you get out of CBS, NBC, and CNN. And here you have Fox News actually pushing against the narrative, giving time to other stories, giving a lot more balance in which you actually get to hear from Trump supporters describe eloquently why they like him. And he detests that. As far as he's concerned, that's all lowbrowism. And of course, I'm sure he can go to Hannity's show and cite some conspiracy theory here or there that he thinks is lowbrowism because it's being put out by Fox News and a bunch of Trump supporters are believing it. While his outlets are pumping Russian collusion stories out daily. He loves a good hoax when it's coming from the left to discredit the right. Think of all the bullcrap that came out against George W. Bush when he was president, and the bullcrap that did not come out or that they fought furiously against when it was shoveled against Obama. I mean, they only want this crazy train to go one way. I'm not going to suggest to you there isn't a lot of manure that flows out of all of the news outlets, which is why I pride myself in creating a news feed, both on Twitter and on Gab, that you can follow, that is free of the liberal bias, and it's free of fake news. I'm proud that I have a very good record of not passing along fake news. I believe we've had 2 or 3 instances now in 14 months when I've had to go back to a story that I tweeted along or passed along on Gab and tell readers that it turned out to be fake news. That's a pretty good track record when there's a tremendous amount of fake news being pushed out every single day. So he's just hating on Fox News because there's some counter argument to the prevailing narrative out there. Quote, "We anti-Trumpers have our lowbrowism too, mostly on late night TV. But anti-Trump lowbrowism bursts into full bloom with the Wolf Book." End quote. Notice he does not list MSNBC, CNN, every columnist who's a left-wing wacko and gets syndicated out throughout the country, or every celebrity who's out there tweeting crazy crap. No, the only lowbrowism, as far as David Brooks is concerned, is just the late-night comedians. I think he's thinking of Colbert, who's been using foul language against the president. So in his mind, it's just Stephen Colbert using foul language that is lowbrowism on his end, not the crazy tweets that I see regularly from the celebrities. And if you want some sense of this, folks, I have kept track of it on my Twitter account, and occasionally I will post a link on Gab. If you go, my Twitter handle is @daily_stir. So it's daily stir with an underscore between the 2 words. If you search for @daily_stir and hashtag batshit crazy, that's the hashtag I've used because I'm the only one using it and it brings up all of my tweets. I have so far tweeted that hashtag batshit crazy 274 times in the last year and a half. Each and every one, and you can search for that and bring up the whole list in numerical order of all the crazy train things that some celebrity or blue check person on the left has said about the president or Republicans. Not just, I disagree with them or they're wrong on this policy, bat-shit crazy stuff, claiming that he's the next Hitler or the next Stalin. People just losing their minds. Clearly, people who you would think, if you didn't see them in movies and think that they were a functioning celebrity in the world, if you just saw this tweet in isolation, you would think they were in a mental hospital. Go do the search and read them. It could be a good drinking game on the weekend if you just want to read through those tweets because it's nuts. And as far as David Brooks is concerned, the only nuts you see on the left is Stephen Colbert on late night TV, right? So when he talks about these narrow worlds where you can't see anything outside of your narrow view, he exempts himself, and he should not. Quote, "The ultimate test of the lowbrow is not whether it challenges you, teaches you, or captures the contours of reality. It's whether you feel an urge to share it on social media. In every war, nations come to resemble their enemies, so I suppose it's normal that the anti-Trump movement would come to resemble the pro-Trump movement. But it's not good. I've noticed a lot of young people look at the monotonous daily hysteria of we anti-Trumpers and they find it silly. This isn't just a struggle over a president, it's a struggle over what rules we're going to play by after Trump. Are we all going to descend permanently into the Trump standard of acceptable behavior?" End quote. So David Brooks belongs to the Never Trump group of continual losers, and they were being beaten by liberals who had no trouble using these kinds of tactics. But he can't stand the idea that we would actually win with these kinds of tactics. He's telling you he would rather lose than participate in this kind of politics. Because, of course, for a lot of these Never Trump Republicans, it's not about winning or losing. It's about knowing every night when you go to bed that you're a better person. And I wonder how many people in concentration camps, or who were led off to the slaughter, or whose village was being overrun by a stronger enemy, right in seconds before the axe separated their head from the rest of their body, thought, at least I'm a better person than them. Quote, or are we going to restore the distinction between excellence and mediocrity, truth and a lie? Are we going to insist on the difference between a genuine expert and an ill-informed blowhard? Are we going to restore the distinction between those institutions like the Congressional Budget Office that operate by professional standards and speak with legitimate authority, and the propaganda mills that don't? End quote. This is the Congressional Budget Office that is required, essentially by law, to assess the 10-year financial impact of bills. And they do their best, essentially, to guess as to what's going to happen when those bills pass. They are often wrong. They made projections on how many people would enroll in Obamacare, and they made projections on what it would cost. We are now nearly 10 years into Obamacare, and their projections have been proven to be wildly wrong. Their enrollment numbers are not even close to what they said they would be, and the budget numbers are hundreds of billions of dollars off from what they claimed. They were wrong. Now, look, they get it wrong all the time, but for some, they're an appeal to authority, and every bill is required by the rules of the House to have these reports. But that doesn't mean that these experts are any better at this than anybody else. And it's interesting to me that he would cite the Congressional Budget Office when they have actually no history of being correct. Now, they do backwards reports as well when they go and assess the impacts of something that's already happened. And those reports actually can be very useful because that's based on stuff you can actually quantify. But if you look at what the CBO has done over the years in projecting things forward, they have had no better luck than a rooster picking at sticks on the ground. And yet, here is David Brooks saying, are we going to rely on experts like the Congressional Budget Office or just blowhards? This is the guy who would rely on the UN when it came to climate change. And they, over the years, issued reports making the most insane forecasts for global temperatures, which we now, 25 years later, know were dead wrong. And those were the world's best experts brought together to make predictions, and they didn't do any better than a rooster pecking at... Matter of fact, I should roll this back. They did worse than a rooster pecking at straw, because a rooster would be right half the time. And it turns out that all of the UN's projections were wrong on the upside. Think about that. They made 5 or 6 projections over 10 to 20 years on what the global temperature would do. And then now we can track what the global temperature actually did. And every single one of their projections was wrong on the high side, which tells you that this was not experts making their best guess, because if they had done that, half their projections would have been under and half of them would have been over. They were all over, which tells you it was a political document meant to scare the crap out of people and move politicians to do what they wanted them to do. These are the experts that David Brooks wants us to defer to. End quote. Here's the last paragraph. There's a hierarchy of excellence in every sphere. There's a huge difference between William F. Buckley and Sean Hannity, between the reporters at this newspaper and a rumor spreader. Part of this struggle is to maintain those distinctions, not to contribute to their evisceration. End quote. William F. Buckley, bless his heart, was a great writer, but he led the Republican Party as an intellectual leader during basically 50 years of continual losses. And he actually, most famously, is quoted for saying that his job was to stand athwart history yelling stop. So he actually told you from the beginning that he didn't think he was going to win, and that his job was just to make the intellectual argument for the side that was going to lose, to sew really good uniforms for the Washington Generals. Now, a guy like Hannity may not be as eloquent, maybe he's not as brilliant as William F. Buckley, but he is part of a movement that's winning, actually winning on the battlefield. And David Brooks would prefer William F. Buckley. So I promised a 1-year report card on Congress and Trump. I'm going to do that next week, which should be close to the President's State of the Union. But I did work on something this week that I want to share. I was interested in these House Republicans and whether or not I knew we needed to go after some never-Trumpers. Now, I'm going to put this in context. I realize that the House is in jeopardy, and there's a chance that Democrats may gain control of it. Although, I have to say in the last few days, as I've been seeing stories that now say it's an ironclad lock that Democrats are going to take over the House, I've begun to think that maybe Republicans are going to hold on to it. Because when all the pollsters and all the media people are telling you, they're not writing stories saying it's possible. When they're telling you it is now unavoidable that Democrats are going to take over the House, I got enough history in this game to understand that probably that's not what's going to happen. That's a lot of wishful thinking, trying to make it happen, essentially, and depress voter turnout on our side and inspire voter turnout on their side by painting the same kind of picture they did with Hillary Clinton. Okay, so I have been collecting news stories that list how people voted on key issues over the last 6 months or so in anticipation of doing this House scorecard. And so I ended up choosing 4.5 votes, and I'll explain the half one in a second. First of all, I took the amendment that Justin Amash proposed in the House as one of the scorecard votes. I wanted to know which Republicans were willing to vote to curtail the FISA program. And so if you voted against the amendment, you got a 1 in my spreadsheet. And I'm going to explain the numbers in a second. There were also about 37 or so Republicans that sent a letter to Paul Ryan at one point demanding a DACA amnesty. You got a 3 in your column if you signed on to that letter, because I wanted to weight that more on your score if you did that. That's just terrible. It's just terrible to demand a DACA amnesty, okay? Then in the course of my research, I remembered, some of these people who were showing up on the lists constantly. I saw in an article that somebody had scored high with the League of Conservation Voters, and I thought, that reminded me. The top 10 scores from Republicans in the League of Conservation scorecards should also be on my list. So if you were in the top 10, whoever the top 10 Republicans were who got the best scores from the League of Conservation Voters, I gave you a 1 for that. And that's because these people are obviously the most adamant with the environmental community. And look, the League of Conservation Voters is not out there trying to clean up your local creek or to reduce garbage going into the landfill. They're all working at the highest levels on global warming, BS, Barbra Streisand, and stuff like that. So if a Republican is scoring well with them, that's not a Republican we want. So I gave him a 1 for that. Also, there was an article that described what happened on the carried interest loophole, something the president had campaigned on eliminating and that got stripped out of the bill or never made it in on the House side. And there was an article about the fact that there were 4 key Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee who blocked that language that would have eliminated the carried interest loophole. So I identified those 4 and I gave them a 2 in the scorecard. So you got a 1 for voting against the Amash Amendment on FISA. You got a 1 if you were the top 10 in the League of Conservation Voters. You got a 3 if you signed on to that DACA amnesty letter. You got a 2 if you're one of the 4 key members who blocked the carried interest loophole. And I also gave you a half point. There was this letter at one point that Sundance had put up on his website. A whole bunch of Republicans signed a letter very early on in the Trump administration, basically telling him not to mess with NAFTA. And it was clearly the kind of letter that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had put together and then just pulled the chain on all of their members to sign on to. And I think a lot of people reflexively did that. I didn't want to weight that a full 1, but I didn't like the people acting as stooges for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce so early on in the administration, and so I gave a half point, and a lot of people signed on to that. But that means that a lot of those guys, their full score was just a half point. They weren't on any of the other issues, and so they scored very low. So once I then collated it all, and I will post this. I'm going to post this spreadsheet on thedailystir.com so you can see it yourself. But I ended up identifying 37 members. Essentially, the highest score that anybody got was 7.5. Basically, Carlos Curbelo in Florida's District 26, he scored on every single one of my scorecards. He got the full score. You can't do better than 7.5 on my spreadsheet, and he got it. He was the only one. And then there were some 5s and 4.5s and on down, and I ended up cutting this off at 3. So everyone who got a 3 or above, and it turned out to be 37 members, ended up on my list of people that I think should be targeted in their primaries. Now, I then went and looked at their districts to get some sense of whether or not a primary fight would actually cost us the seat. Okay, I've been around in politics, and I don't necessarily want that to happen. But it turns out that there are only a handful of these seats that are truly vulnerable, and I think they're going to flip anyway. You got some people who are barely winning re-election, and I think that the way the numbers are going, people who got like 50.5% of the vote are not going to get 50.5% of the vote in this next election. There's going to be a few points shaved off in everybody's election because of this backlash that's coming from the Democrats. So I made my own assessment over whether or not I thought a district was going to flip. And like I said, I posted all of this. So I'm just going to go through the names and give you a sense of who should be targeted. In California, we have 3 members, Jeff Denham, David Valadao, and Mimi Walters, all of whom should be targeted in their primaries and removed. Denham's and Valadao's seats, I believe, are safe. If you can get a Trump Republican in there, we will hold on to that seat. Mimi Walters is uncontestable. It's unwinnable by a Democrat. So all 3 of these seats are going to continue to be held by Republicans, and these 3 people should be knocked out. Denham's score was 4 out of 7.5. Valadao's was 4, and Walters was 4.5. All 3 of them were signers of the DACA letter, and they should go. In Colorado, you have Mike Kaufman, Colorado 6. He's going to be running again, but he only won that seat in 2014, the last off year, by 51.9%. In my estimation, that seat is lost, and it will go to the Democrats in the election in November. So I say knock Mike out in his primary and put a Trump nationalist Republican in there and give us a real contrast election for the voters to decide on. My argument is if you're going to lose the seat anyway, go big or go home. Carlos Curbelo in Florida, this is a seat that's going to flip. He got 51.5% in the last off-year election. He is not going to get those numbers again. And this guy has a 7.5. He literally scored on every single one of my votes. He's a strong never-Trumper, and I'd rather give the seat away than maintain him in the House of Representatives. Switch him out in his primary for a Trump Republican. Go hard to try to win that seat. I think we're going to lose it anyway, but go big or go home. The other Florida seat is Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and she is not running for re-election, and that seat's going to flip. So it's going to be an open primary anyway. My hope is we get a good, strong Republican in there. In Idaho, we have a seat, Michael Simpson, and he got a 4 on my chart out of 7.5. It's a totally Republican seat. Nobody in Idaho's District 2 should be this strong a never-Trumper. Mike Simpson signed the DACA letter. No Democrat is going to win this seat, and it is asinine for Mr. Simpson to be sitting there. The people of Idaho need to replace him. In Illinois, we have 3 seats. Peter Roskam in Illinois 6, Rodney Davis in Illinois 13, and Adam Kinzinger in Illinois 16. They either have 3.5s or 4.5s. Roskam did not sign the DACA letter, but he is one of the 4 people who saved the carried interest loophole. All 3 of them sit in Illinois seats that Democrats cannot win. They are completely safe seats, and they should not be getting these scores. The people of Illinois' 6th, 13th, and 16th districts should replace Mr. Roskam, Mr. Davis, and Mr. Kinzinger immediately. You have the opportunity, folks. Get at them. In Indiana, we have only 1 seat, seat 5, held by Susan Brooks, who gets a 4.5. She was a signer on the DACA letter. It's an impossible seat for Democrats to win. She should not be sitting there. Go get her, people of Indiana. In Maine, District 2, Bruce Poliquin. This guy got 47% when he won the seat in 2014. He got a 4 in my score. We're going to lose this seat. This seat is going to the Democrats in November, so why not put a Trump Republican in there? Get to it. In Michigan, Fred Upton is in Michigan 6, and this one's kind of on the edge. He got nearly 56% of the vote when he ran for election in 2014, the last off-year election. I think this is a seat we can hold, and a guy who signed the DACA letter shouldn't be in that seat. So I would suggest the people of Michigan replace Fred Upton with a Trump Republican and take their chances. In North Carolina's 2nd District, George Holding, it's a totally Republican seat. and the man got a 3. He was one of the carried interest loophole blockers. He got a 3 score on my spreadsheet. It's not a seat the Democrats can win. He should be primaried out. In New Jersey, we have 4 seats. Frank Lobiondo has a 5. He's not running for re-election, and there's a lot of suggestion that that seat is going to flip. So go big or go home. Thomas MacArthur, Christopher Smith, and Leonard Lance. That's New Jersey 3rd, 4th, and 7th. They're all impossible districts for Democrats to win, and these guys got 4 or 5s on my charts. They're all signers. Every one of these 4 people in New Jersey were signers of the DACA letter. Get rid of them. Mark Amode is in Nevada's 2nd district. He got 58.3% of the vote in that district in 2014. I do not see that as a district that Democrats can flip. He signed the DACA letter, and he should be primaried out. In New York, we have 4. Peter King in New York's 2, John Faso in New York 19, Elise Stefanik in New York 21, and John Katko in New York 24. The only one who has a district that they all signed the DACA letter, but the only one who has a district that maybe the Democrats could get would be Elise Stefanik. And so I'm kind of impartial, or I'm undecided on whether or not she should be targeted. I think she should anyway for signing the DACA letter. The other 3 are in districts that Democrats cannot win, and they signed that DACA letter. The good Republicans of New York need to replace those 4 members in their primaries. Pennsylvania has 5 seats. Glenn Thompson in Pennsylvania 5, Ryan Costello in Pennsylvania 6, Patrick Meehan in Pennsylvania 7, Brian Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania 8, and Charles Dent in Pennsylvania 15. All 5 of them signed the DACA letter. Dent is not running for re-election, and they are all in seats that I believe the Democrats can't win. Maybe Costello's, but I doubt it. The rest are impossible for Democrats. Why do we have DACA letter signers sitting in staunchly Republican seats? The good people of Pennsylvania can do better. Texas has 2 seats. Joe Barton got into some scandals around a mistress. He's not running for re-election. He signed the DACA letter, but we just need to make sure that a good Trump Republican wins that primary. Kevin Brady is in Texas 8. This is an impossible seat for Democrats, and he gets a 3 because he was one of the carried interest loophole, and he voted against the Amish Amendment. That's how he got his 3. And he blocked the carried interest loophole, and he voted against the Amish Amendment. Replace him. William Hurd is the 3rd one in Texas. He got 49.8% of the vote in 2014. That seat is going to flip to the Democrats in this election. The guy signed the DACA letter. Go big or go home. Replace him with a Trump Republican. In Utah, Chris Stewart, Utah's 2. Signed the DACA letter. He has a staunchly Republican seat. Why is he there? Mia Love has a seat that she barely won, 50.9 in 2014. She signed the DACA letter. I cannot see the people of Utah electing a Democrat. And I realize that she's an African-American, black Republican, and that has some cachet, but I would replace her. Scott Taylor in Virginia's 2nd district. This is a district the Democrats cannot win. He signed the DACA letter. And then in Washington, we have 2 seats. Dan Newhouse in Washington 4 and David Reichert in Washington 8. Reichert is not running for re-election. Both seats, I believe, are out of reach for the Democrats. Both of them signed the DACA letter. So there you have it. 17 states in total, about 37 seats. I will post it on thedailystir.com. But if you live in those states, you got your work cut out for you. You have a bunch of people in seats the Democrats cannot get voting against our interests, and they should go. So I saw that Trump has now publicly said that Russia is helping North Korea. You can see now that that's likely why arms were sold to the Ukrainians who are resisting the Russians. Trump knows about leverage, and I think you can expect more consequences. So don't be surprised if in the next couple of weeks we see something that's not good for Russia happening on our end, because the president's going to want to send a signal that he doesn't appreciate their helping North Korea. Also, expect Spain to heat up here in the next couple weeks. Madrid had been very upset about the independence movements in Catalonia, and they had dissolved the government and forced new elections in December. And what happened was the people of Catalonia, they re-elected their independence government coalition. So it looks like they may try to swear in Carlos Puigdemont, the independence leader who is in exile in Belgium right now. They may try to do that over the internet. And Madrid has claimed that they're going to come in and remove local rule and basically invade, if you will, Catalonia. But I think this is just going to heat up. So expect that to be in the news in the next couple of weeks.
So continuing to thwart the will of the people.
Of course. Doris and I saw Molly's Game this week. This is a true story about a gal who came from Colorado, had been a competitive Olympic skier, and then kind of was injured out of that and moved to Los Angeles and ended up involved in this underground poker game that celebrities and others were involved in. And so it's Aaron Sorkin writing and directing this story. He's very talented, if not a communist. And luckily, this story really doesn't have a lot of room for Aaron to kind of push his West Wing narratives and those kinds of things. So it's actually a pretty enjoyable movie. I think Doris and I would both recommend it.
Well, I thought Jessica Chastain was fabulous in it. The pacing of the movie was excellent, so I didn't feel like falling asleep halfway through it. For me, it would be a must-see. I really recommend the movie.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a fun watch, and of course, all the celebrities' names in the poker games are changed, but it's fun to try to figure out who is it that she's writing about, who's she talking about and telling this story. And for those of you who are going to go check out the movie, the main celebrity, Player X, is Tobey Maguire. So when you're watching, remember that all the things, both positive and negative, that character does, that was Tobey Maguire. And probably the guy that was hitting on her in the side room, the celebrity that she was trying to warn about the text messages and perhaps images he was sending around, that's probably Leonardo DiCaprio. And then there's this one celebrity with long hair who plays very badly in the game and is kind of humiliated. And I suspect that was Ben Affleck. So having that information before you go in, I think would be kind of useful for when those scenes come along. We recommend the movie.
Yes.
I would give it a B+. It's a good movie and it's enjoyable. That's about all the time we have for this show. You can listen to this episode and past episodes, which are filled with all sorts of historical information. I've noticed a lot of people who find the show want to go back and listen all the way through, and it would help to do that because we define a lot of terms, and we basically use current events as a way to talk about overriding political principles and the history of what the left has been doing in this country over the last 100 years. You can find all of them on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, YouTube, on our website, thedailystir.com, and as I said before, we do play every day on the405media.com. This is a labor of love, but we need to grow, so I'm hoping you will share this podcast with a friend that you believe would enjoy it just as much as you would. Trump supporters, you are not alone. Goodbye, Doris.
Goodbye, Matt.